It's found in Esther. So I'll give you all a second to go there. Esther, which is right after Nehemiah. Right before Job. All right. Esther chapter 4, verse 11. 4 verse 11. Wait on Misty. She gave me a hard time a couple weeks ago. You're like, I wasn't even ready, and you went already and said it. I'm like, well, now we're going to wait on her. That's why I said it's after Nehemiah, before Job. See, there's some benefits to being up here, right? All right. Esther chapter 4, verse 11 says, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called in, but have been called to go into the king these 30 days. All right, I will turn over to Janice.
All right. Well, happy Sabbath again. I know you can't see me up here, but my knees are knocking, so just bear with me. Let's start out with prayer first, please. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, only you know what needs to be said today. Lord, I ask that you talk through me, that you give me the words, Lord, that are needing to be said, and help that this today will reach someone, maybe me, maybe I'm the one that's supposed to have it, but whomever it's for, Lord, I ask that you talk to them. I thank you and I praise you for the opportunity to serve you, Father, and I ask all these things in your name. Amen. Well, let me tell you, Satan's really working because I got the sinus issue too. So bear with me on that, okay? Today, if you notice that my sermon is titled Me First. So we're going to talk about a couple of me firsts. Have you ever watched when an ice cream truck comes, all the little kids running out there, me first, me, I want me first. Well, I've seen some adults do that too. But just let me tell you, and I may have been one of them from time to time, who knows, you know. And at the grocery store, have you ever watched where, especially on Friday afternoon, when you're trying to get everything done for the Sabbath, and there's these long lines, and all of a sudden, one of the lines opens up and says, I'll take the next one, and you're looking at it thinking, yeah, me, here, me first. And you get up there really quickly, and then there's this other person that's there, and that person, you're thinking, oh, they're going to get ahead of me. I just know it. They're going to get ahead of me. And they look at you and go, it's okay, dear. You can go first. Oh, don't it make you feel kind of bad, like, oh, now I feel so rotten because I should have said that myself. It shouldn't have been me first. And then, but here's the best me first of all. And that would be when God's calling his children to do his work, and you hear that person such as Isaiah, in Isaiah 6:8, where Isaiah says, also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Then I said, here am I, send me. That's the kind of me first that we should have in our lives. And I kind of feel like that today, being up here, or whoever stands up here, is always doing that me first, because it's not always easy to do this, you know, but it's a wonderful thing inside to know that the Lord is allowing you to do this. It's quite a privilege. There, I'm going to kind of switch a little bit here. How many of you have ever been on an airplane? I want to see your hands. How many of you have been on an airplane? Okay, now how many of you remember the very first time you got on an airplane? Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you about mine. When my sister-in-law passed away. She chose, before she passed away, she chose to not have the preparation that you normally do, so which meant that it had to be a quick burial. So my children were very small, and I was going to have to fly to Maryland, terrified. Because let me tell you something, I have looked at those airplanes lots of times thinking, how is that staying in the air? That's just a little scary. So I tearfully got on the airplane, left my children and my husband, and when I got on there, yep, there it is. Looks like a bus with wings. It's like, oh, Lord, how is this thing going to go up in the air? So I immediately sat down on my seat, buckled myself in, thinking, all right, I'm ready. I'm ready for this. And I look around, and nobody else is doing that. Nobody else is doing it. Nobody else is buckling up. Finally, they're getting ready to taxi out, and the sign comes up, says, buckle your seatbelt. And here's the stewardess up here, and she's saying, there is a card in the seat in front of you. You need to take that card out. Well, yeah, I got it. I took it out, and here I am looking at it. Yep, okay, and I'm looking around. Nobody else is doing that. And I'm thinking, people, you need to listen. This is important stuff here. You got to listen. And the lady sitting next to me is just kind of looking at me like, well, okay. All right. So then it comes to the thing, where she does the little thing. If you've been on there, she does the little thing. In case of an emergency, the lights on the floor are going to come up. And I'm thinking, oh, please don't let the lights come up. And then she's doing the thing about, here's your emergency exit. And I thought, that one's mine right there. That's the one I'm going to get. And then she talks about your seat. In case of a crash, your seat is your flotation device. Did you ever have the urge to get up really quickly and see if that thing will come loose so that you can use it in case of an emergency? Now, if you're going to crash, you might not need it. But okay, I was a good girl. I didn't get up and do it. But then she talks about the oxygen. In case that we lose cabin pressure, she really makes you feel really good about being on this bus with wings. And she's talking about, in case we lose cabin pressure, the oxygen mask will come down. She drops it down, shows you how to put it on. And she says, but make sure that even if you have small children, put it on you first. Make sure that you have that oxygen first. And I'm thinking, okay, me first. I'm going to put that oxygen on so that I can help anybody else. And then I looked up at what she had in her hand, and I'm thinking, just how far is that going to stretch if somebody back there needs my help? But okay, I'll do what she says. The lady next to me was really very sweet. And one of these days, I'm going to tell you a story about that lady, but not today. But just let me say, she could have been an angel. Just saying. But for right now, I want you to remember about the oxygen. That's important. We all know that the very first, me first, was in heaven, and that was with Lucifer. He decided he was far more superior than Jesus, and his me first was the birthplace of sin. Then the next me first, I think, was Eve, and she had the me first attitude that she knew more than God. She took the fruit, she ate it, and then we have been suffering from that. That's the story. That's the history. And we know that one because we're experiencing it day to day. There's been many me firsts in the Bible, throughout the Bible, and we're going to talk about 3 of them today. So I'm going to ask that you turn your Bibles to Genesis 20. We're going to talk about Abraham. And I'm actually going to start with verse 2. Now Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. He took her, took Abraham's wife, Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she's a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, Will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he not just say to me, she is my sister? And even she herself said, he's my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocent in my hands, I have done this. And God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. For I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. So Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all of his servants, and told all these things in their hearing, and the men were very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? Have I offended you that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done deeds to me that ought not to have been done. Then Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you have in view that you have done this thing? Now this next verse is very important. And Abraham said, well, because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed, she is truly my sister, for she is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came to pass when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do for me in every place wherever we go. Say of me, he is my brother. Now, stop and think about Abraham for just a minute. He kind of had a little bit of lack of faith there, don't you think? Because in verse 11, where he said that I had a fear that God wasn't in this place, if Abraham had had the faith at that time, I feel like he would have known that it wouldn't have mattered had God been any other place. He was with Abraham. He was with him. He was going to protect him and those that were with him. But later on, we know that Abraham's faith grew tremendously strong enough that he was willing to put his son on the chopping block, whenever, more or less. He was willing to sacrifice him for the Lord, and the Lord stopped him and said, no, don't do this. I've got this. But Abraham's faith did grow strong. So his me first, the first one, was not so good, but his me first later, Lord, take me, let me do whatever I need to do for you. That's the kind of attitude that we should have. Now I'm going to ask you to turn to Esther. I love the story of Esther. Don't you just love the story of Esther? Now, there are people out there that may not know the story of Esther. So I'm going to kind of paraphrase a little bit some of this. I'm going to read a little and paraphrase a little. So bear with me on this. We're going to start with the very first chapter, verse 1. Now, it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, and I hope I'm saying this right. Am I saying it right? He reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia, so he had a very large kingdom. In those days when the king sat, I'm not going to say his name again because I'll say it wrong. And in those days when the king sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, I'm gathering that's the capital, that in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast of all of his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast, lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. And we're going to go over to verse 9. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to the king. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded, I'm going to mess these up, I'm sure, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Cesar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of the king, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. She was a very beautiful, beautiful queen. And he wanted to show her off. You know, he was proud to have her. And after 7 days of drinking, he was really proud to show her. But Queen Vashti, she refused. She refused to come to the king's command, brought by the eunuchs. Therefore, the king was furious. He was so angry, and he was embarrassed, I'm sure, because, well, she was supposed to do what he told her to do, and she said no. And his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew the law and justice. I'm going to drop down to 15. What shall we do to Queen Vashti, according to the law, because she did not obey the command of the king brought to her by the eunuchs? And Mehuman answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. I'm sure I'm not saying it right. For the queen's behavior will become known to all the women. Here's the problem right here. Be known to all the women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report. King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus, they will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out before him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall not come no more before the king, and let the king give the royal position to another who is better than she. So she lost out. She lost out there, didn't she? And they did not want the women in the country to think, well, if the queen can say no to the king, we can say no too. And then they got women's rights, you know. They didn't want them to have the women's rights. So there you go. Well, they decided then that when the king spoke with the 7 eunuchs, he spoke with them and he said, well, what are we going to do? And they said, well, we need a new queen. So they sent out a decree that all of the young virgins, the young beautiful virgins, would come before the king, and there would be a new queen picked. Well, Mordecai was a very devout Jew. He loved the Lord very much. And he had raised his daughter, Esther. It was actually his niece, because her parents had passed away, and he raised her. But he raised her as his daughter. And she was very, very beautiful, very beautiful. So he told her, he said, you are going to be one of them that goes before the king. So we need to get you in there. And she agreed. And so she went in there, and she was so beautiful that the eunuchs, the ones that were over this, decided that she had to be in a special place. She had a special room with special maidens that made her look even more beautiful. So when it came time for them to go before the king, whoever he held his scepter out to, that was the new queen. So guess what? When Esther went before him, oh yeah, that's the one, he said. That's the one. And he held out his scepter, and she became the queen. Well, Mordecai loved her so much that he would sit outside the palace just so he could get a glimpse of her and know that she was okay. I mean, he raised her. That was his daughter to him. But one day while he was sitting out there, he was listening, and he heard a couple of eunuchs talking, and they was planning to kill the king. And the king said, and so he sent a message to the king, hey, these 2 eunuchs, they're planning to kill you. And so the king was very glad to get that message, and they were put to death. That saved his life. So later on, when Mordecai was sitting out there, there was a man named Haman. Now, Haman was very well liked by the king. He thought he was a pretty good dude. So he gave him a lot of power. And Haman thought that the power kind of went to his head, and he thought he was pretty special, and everybody should bow down to him and just tremble and be scared every time they saw him because, well, he was a bully. Let's face it. Haman was a bully. But Mordecai did not do that. He did not bow down to him. He wasn't afraid of him. And that made Haman mad. He was so angry that he thought, hey, Mordecai is a Jew. I can't do anything really openly to him, but I can go to the king and say, look, you know what? These Jews are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. We need to wipe them out. We need to get rid of them. Well, the king trusted him. So when he went to the king and he told him, he said, you know, this is what we need to do. The king said, okay, write up a decree. I'll sign it, and you can do whatever you feel like needs to be done. Well, one of the eunuchs that really liked Mordecai and knew he was a good man, brought this to him and said, Mordecai, they're going to wipe out the Jews. They're going to get rid of them. You need to do something. So Mordecai sent a message to Esther, and he said, Esther, you need to do something. You need to go before the king, and you need to go talk to him. And you need to plead for our lives. So that's where we're going to start out with where our verse was today. We're going to go to chapter 4, and I'm going to do a bit of reading here, but we're going to start with 11. Now remember, she has gotten this message that if something's not done, they're all going to die. And she's a Jew too, and she knows that. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called into the king these 30 days. Now she knows I haven't been in there. If I go before the king in this outer court and he looks over there and he doesn't hold out his scepter, I'm going to die. But here's what she says. So they told Mordecai, Esther's words, and Mordecai told them to give this answer to Esther. Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom but for such a time as this? Now, in Patriarchs and Prophets, Sister White wrote this. This is Patriarchs and Prophets, page 601. The crisis that Esther faced demanded quick, earnest action. But both she and Mordecai realized that unless God should work mightily in their behalf, their own efforts would be availing. So Esther took the time to commune with God, the source of her strength. Verse 15, then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. She was willing to give her life, knowing that if the golden scepter was not held out to her, she would die. But she loved the Lord, and she loved her family and the other people that were going to die so much that she was willing to die. So Mordecai went his way and did according to Esther commanded him. And I love the rest of this story. It's so good. Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes, and she stood in the inner court of the king's palace. She was so beautiful. Across from the king's house, while the king sat on the royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. And when I read that, I was thinking, what else did the king do? Did he just sit there all day? You know, you kind of wonder, what did he do? What was his job? I know he was saying, you do this, and you do that, and you do that, but you never hear of him actually getting up and doing anything except sitting on the throne with his scepter. So, just a thought. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Whew, aren't you glad? Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter, and the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom. So Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Now, she's got something going on there, don't you think? Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went into the banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. Then Esther answered and said, my petition and my request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I shall prepare for him, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. So Haman went out that day. Oh, he was so happy. He was just tickled pink because, well, he got to go in to the king and queen together, just him. He was the only one in there. He was probably feeling pretty proud of himself, don't you think? So Haman went out that day. He was joyful with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. That just really made him mad. You're supposed to be afraid of me, Mordecai. Why are you not? Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and his wife's rest. Then Haman told them of his great riches. He like I said, he was a proud man. He was bragging. He was telling them everything. The multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced himself above the officials and the servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared. And tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. Now he's feeling pretty good about himself, don't you think? Yet all this avails me nothing so long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate. He was really he wanted everything. Then as his wife Janice and his friends said to him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet, and the thing that pleased Haman. So he had the gallows made. Not a wise decision on his part. We find out later. That night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. Now remember what I told you Mordecai did a while ago for the king. Don't forget that. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers, who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? Well, the king's servants who attended him said, nothing. Nothing's been done for Mordecai. So the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman, who had just entered the court, the outer court of the king's palace, to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's servants said to him, Haman is there. He's standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king asked him, what shall be done for a man whom the king delights to honor? Now, what do you think Haman's thinking? Oh, me. It's got to be me. It's got to be me. Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn, something the king had on himself, something special, and a horse on which the king had ridden, which had a royal crest placed on its head. Let's get really fancy here. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, this shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Well, you just know he's thinking, wow, this is going to be so great. He's going to do this for me. It's going to be great. I'm going to love it. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai. Oh, how he must have been crushed. The Jew who sits within the king's gate, leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken. He probably wanted to get down and just slither out, don't you think? So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square and proclaimed. He had to do it himself. Can you imagine? Haman had to do that himself after thinking that Mordecai should have been hanged. Instead, he's leading him through the city square, telling everybody what a wonderful man he is. Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all the friends everything that had happened to him, the wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Well, he was probably thinking, well, I didn't get the robe, didn't get the horse, I didn't get led down the gates, but I'm going to the king's palace, and there's not going to be anybody there but Queen Esther, the king, and me. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of the wine, the king again said to Esther, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request up to half the kingdom? It shall be done. Then Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. Now, did you ever wonder, did he know that she was a Jew when he chose her? Did he know? I don't think he did. I don't think he did. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss, which would have meant she would have been gone. He would have lost his queen, and she would have become a servant. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman right here. This man right here that's sitting in here with us and eating at our table. It's him. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. It upset the king so much that he arose in his wrath from the banquet of the wine, and he went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before the Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. He knew the king was going to do something terrible to him. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbanoth, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look over there. There's a gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. Take him out there and hang him. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was subsided. Now, when we think about Esther, do we think about her being the good me first or the bad me first? I feel like she was the good me first. I talked to the pastor about this, and both of us kind of feel like that Esther was She had the same presence of mind as Jesus did. I will die if I need to. If you need me to die, I'll die, doing the Lord's work. Of course, we know that Jesus did. So I'm going to ask you now to turn to Matthew. We're going to go to Matthew 26, and I'm going to start with verse 36. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. And Jesus knew he was going to die. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." Jesus was struggling. He was struggling not because he didn't want to give his life for us, because he did want to give his life for us, but he was struggling. It was a struggle. Remember, part of him was human too, and still is. And it was a struggle. He felt everything that we feel, everything that we feel. If you ever feel like, well, they don't really understand, yes, they do. Jesus has felt it all. He went a little farther and he fell on his face and he prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Jesus did not want to be separated from his Father through death. We don't want to be separated from our Father either. Our goal is to be God first, not me first. Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "Why, could you not watch for me 1 hour? 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again, a second time, he went away and prayed, "Oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me, unless I drink it, your will be done." That is how we should feel as well. God's will should be done, not ours. And sometimes we get so caught up in life, so very caught up in life. And I'm going to be the first to admit, I've used the selfish me first a multitude of times. Anger, frustration, pity, selfishness, greed, unhealthy desires are the kinds of attitude that cause us to wander away from God. And I've experienced all of those in my life. Probably everyone in this room has, and everyone that's listening out there, we've all experienced that in our life. But I truly believe that God wants us to be patient, kind, giving, loving, and have healthy desires. And most of all, put him first. If we do that, the me first in our lives will be according to God's desire for us. Our closing song is Amazing Grace, and I don't have the page number for that. What is it? 108. If you're listening, 108.